Hey friends, so most people think of home ownership as a financial decision. They look at mortgage rates, down payments, and credit scores. And while those things matter, home ownership is actually spiritual. Stay with me. It's about stewardship and stability, and it's also about faith. See, the Bible is filled with stories that show us how land, property, and home ownership aren't just transactions. They're part of God's plan for building wealth, creating legacy, and walking in purpose. Now, if you've been thinking about buying a home, but you're unsure if it's the right time or if you're feeling stuck financially, then this video is for you. Because today we're going to break down 7 Bible stories that reveal God's plan for home ownership. And by the end of this, you're going to see real estate in a completely different way. Friends, I'm Sonali Hudson. I'm a real estate agent in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and I help people navigate the home buying process through a faith-based lens. Because this is more than real estate. Guys, this is kingdom business. Let's get into it. Now, if there's one mistake that I see so many homeowners making, it's jumping in before they're quite ready, getting caught up in the excitement of buying a home without really understanding what it takes to maintain it. And guys, I get it. Who doesn't love the excitement? The idea of owning a home is absolutely thrilling. You start picturing yourself in the backyard, making some barbecues, remodeling the kitchen. You're thinking about the generational wealth you want to build. But Jesus himself warned us about making big decisions without first preparing. In Luke 14:28, he says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" Now, okay, Jesus wasn't just talking about houses specifically. He was talking about the cost of discipleship. But the principle applies across every area of our life, including home ownership. Because here's the truth, owning a home isn't the same as affording a mortgage. Now, I see it all the time. People get pre-approved, they get excited about the number the lender give them, and then they don't stop to factor in property taxes, which if you didn't know, it can go up over time. Homeowners insurance, HOA fees, maintenance costs, because let me tell you something, your house will definitely break. And when you're not renting, you cannot call your landlord. Emergency savings, unexpected repairs, and let me just be real, home ownership is a blessing, but not when it becomes a financial burden. There's nothing wrong with waiting, saving, and getting your finances in order before you buy. Because when you move in God's timing, the blessing will not feel like a burden. And trust me, I have struggled with this for so long, so I'm speaking from experience. So let's make it real. Let's say you're buying a home in Virginia Beach, and where home prices have been rising, you're approved for a $350,000 loan, and that payment feels manageable. But what happens when you factor in $3,000 in property taxes a year, a $1,500 homeowner's insurance policy? Maybe you'll have a roof repair that costs $10,000. And if you didn't count the cost, owning that home is going to feel like a weight, and that's not what God wants for you, friends. You see, the bottom line is this. Home ownership isn't just about whether or not you can buy a house, but whether you're prepared to sustain it. And that's the number 7 biblical truth about home ownership. Before you build, you have to count the cost. Because when you step into home ownership unprepared, what should be a blessing can feel like a burden. Now, once you've counted the cost and you know where you stand, the next step is stewardship. What are you doing with what God has already given you? And that brings us to the number 6 biblical truth about home ownership. You have to manage well before you can own well. And Jesus made that clear in the parable of talents. Let's talk about it. Okay, so I need you to catch this. Home ownership is not just about having a house. It's about stewardship. I've said that several times, and I'm going to keep saying it. And one of the clearest lessons that Jesus gave us on stewardship is in Matthew 25:14-30, and what's known as the parable of talents. Now, in this story, a master gives 3 of his servants different amounts of money, or talents. 2 of them invested and multiplied what they were given. And when the master returned, he was pleased with them. Now, the 3rd servant, he buried his talent in the ground out of fear. When the master saw that, he was furious. He took the talent away and gave it to someone who knew what to do with it. Now, I really want to bring this full circle here into real estate terms as well, because this is exactly how a lot of people treat their finances. They sit on their money instead of investing in something that will help the money grow. Think about this. God has blessed you with resources. It might not feel like much right now, but what you do with what you have determines your next outcome. And let's talk about the reality of why some people feel stuck when it comes to home ownership. It's not always fear, but sometimes it's poor financial management, bad credit, or just simply not having a plan for their money. See, some people spend every dollar they make without saving 5 cents. Some are stuck in the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck because there's no financial strategy in place. Now, others have credit card debt that keeps growing, but they don't realize how it impacts their ability to buy a home. And honestly, some people just never even check their credit, so they don't even know what's going on with their finances. They have no idea where to begin. But here's the thing. Nothing changes until you decide, yes, you, to take stewardship seriously. Because when you invest in a home, you're taking what God has given you and you're multiplying it. You're giving your family a foundation. You're creating something that can appreciate and value. And that, my friends, is true stewardship. Now, I'll be honest with you. A lot of people stay in the cycle of renting out of fear, but also because of lack of preparation. They fear that they can't qualify. They fear that it's too big of a responsibility. They fear making the wrong decision, and they fear. And for some people, it's not even fear. It's bad credit. It's bad spending habits that need to change, or simply not knowing what steps to take. And I get it. Buying a home can feel overwhelming, but that's what I'm here for. Fear will keep you stagnant, but faith will help you move forward. And every step we take, we're going to have to take it in faith. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying that everyone should buy a house tomorrow, but if you know that God is calling you to home ownership, don't bury that calling in the ground. Don't let fear, bad financial habits, or lack of knowledge stop you from moving forward. The bottom line is this, friends. When you invest wisely, prepare well, and steward what you have, God is going to bless it. And that's the difference between renting out of fear and owning with wisdom. Stewardship matters. When God places resources in your hands, it's your responsibility to multiply them and not bury them. But let's be real. What if your finances are a mess? What if you've made mistake after mistake and your credit isn't where it needs to be, or you don't have the money and you feel like you're starting from scratch? Listen, I can relate to that. Sometimes before you can step into homeownership, you have to rebuild. And there's no better example of this than Nehemiah. Friends, I want to keep it real with you guys for a moment. And I really want to talk about the reality of where some of us may be right now. You've counted the costs. You've evaluated your finances. You understand stewardship. But what happens when you look at your financial situation and you realize it is a hot mess? Maybe you have a low credit score. Maybe you've been living from paycheck to paycheck and you don't have a savings for a down payment and you think home ownership is not for you. Maybe you've got debt piled up on debt, and you just feel like home ownership is impossible. And see, this is where a lot of people get discouraged. This is where I got discouraged because they see how far they have to go and they give up before they even get started. But I want you to hear me when I say this, that God is in the business of rebuilding. And there is no better example of rebuilding than the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a story of restoring what was broken. He wasn't a builder. He wasn't a contractor. He was a cupbearer to the king, living comfortably. But when he heard that the walls of Jerusalem were in ruins, something inside of him said, I have to fix this. Now, this wasn't a small project. The walls were completely destroyed. The gates were burned down. The city was vulnerable, and Nehemiah had no money, no materials, and no crew. But what did he do? He prayed. Before he took any action, he sought God. He made a plan. He counted the costs. He assessed the damage, and he figured out what it would take to rebuild. Nehemiah took action, and even though he faced opposition, he didn't let the distraction stop him. And despite the odds, Nehemiah built what was broken. Now, a lot of people look at their finances like Nehemiah looked at those walls. Broken, unstable, and beyond repair. Lord, I can't tell you how many times I felt like that. But Nehemiah shows us that just because something is broken doesn't mean that it can't be rebuilt. Is your credit score low? You can rebuild it. Do you have debt? You can pay it down. If you've made any mistakes with money, you can make different choices moving forward. Rebuilding is not a quick process. It's not easy, but it's possible. And let me tell you from experience, I've worked with so many people who thought that they'd never become homeowners. But when they committed to the process, when they put a plan in place, when they stayed the course, when they did what they thought was impossible, home ownership became possible. Now, what does this look like in real life? Number one, we have to assess the damage. We have to get real about where you are financially. That means pulling credit reports, looking at your debts, and figuring out where the cracks in your foundation are. And then we've got to make a plan. We've got to work on your credit. We've got to start saving. We've got to cut out unnecessary expenses. Even if it takes 6 months or a year, every step forward is progress. And guys, ignore the distractions. There's always going to be a reason to wait. But Nehemiah didn't stop when the enemy tried to discourage him. He stayed focused on the goal. See, the bottom line is this, friends. If something is broken, it doesn't mean it's over. It means it's time to rebuild. And that's the number 5 biblical truth about home ownership. Before you can step into home ownership, you may have to restore what's broken. But once you've rebuilt it, that's when you step into preparation for ownership. And no one did that better than Joseph. So have you been thinking about relocating to Hampton Roads, Virginia? I've got just the thing for you. My team and I have actually taken the time to create the ultimate relocation guide, which is meant to save you hours of research, and I've linked it down below. From top employers, the best hospitals, and a boatload of other things that you need to know before make the move to Hampton Roads. And the best part, guys, it is 100% free. That's right, you heard me, it's 100% free. So just click on the link in the description or the top pinned comment. I hope it helps. God bless you. Okay, so now that we've talked about rebuilding what's broken, the next step is preparing for the future. And there's no better example of financial planning in the Bible than Joseph. Now, Joseph wasn't only wealthy or didn't just manage wealth. He saved an entire nation from financial disaster. See, Joseph's story starts like many of ours, with struggle. I don't know about you, but I have definitely struggled. Now, he was betrayed by his brothers. He was sold into slavery. He was thrown into prison. But because of his wisdom and faithfulness, God positioned him to interpret Pharaoh's dream, and that dream was about money. You see, Pharaoh saw 7 years of abundance coming, followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph didn't just tell him, well, let's hope for the best. Joseph created a strategy. See, what he did was he recognized the opportunity in the good years, which was Genesis 41 through 34. He saved aggressively. He didn't just set aside a little bit. He stored up 20% of all the grain during the years of plenty. That's Genesis 41:35. Now, he made sure that there was enough for the future, and because of his planning, Egypt didn't collapse when the famine hit. So what does this have to do with home ownership? Everything. See, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when buying a home is focusing only on whether or not they can afford it today, instead of preparing for what's coming. Now, you might be in a season right now where your income is good, where you're getting raises from your job, or maybe you have a business that's thriving. But friends, what happens if a famine season comes? See, I know what it's like to be in a famine season, and I want you to ask yourself, what if your income drops? What if your expenses increase? What if you buy a home and you have nothing in the bank, but then your water heater breaks and it's a $6,000 repair? You see, if you don't store up during the financial years of plenty, then when a financial famine hits, it can be harder than it needs to be. Joseph's strategy is exactly what every homeowner needs to apply. You need to build your emergency fund. Before you even thinking about buying, set aside at least 3 to 6 months of expenses so you're covered if something unexpected happens. Don't stretch your budget. If the lender approves you for $400,000, that doesn't mean you have to spend every penny. Give yourself some margin. Think long term. Are you prepared for property taxes to increase? Can you handle maintenance costs? You see, planning ahead is going to ensure that you don't struggle later. The bottom line is this, friends. Real estate is not just about buying a house, it's about sustaining it. And that's the number 4 biblical truth about home ownership. Wise financial planning creates stability. Now, once you've planned and positioned yourself for home ownership, the next step is finding a home that provides security. And that's where Ruth's story comes in. Hey guys, as much as I love making these videos, there's one thing I love more, and that's helping families and people from all over the United States and the world make the move here to Hampton Roads, Virginia. I've helped countless families make the move here. So whether you're coming out next week, next month, or even next year, don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information is right here on the screen, and it'll be linked in the description in case you missed the on-screen pop-up. I look forward to helping you and your family make the move to Hampton Roads, Virginia. God bless you. So friends, now that we've talked about preparing for home ownership, let's talk about why stability matters. Buying a home isn't only about having a place to live, it's about creating security for your future. Now, if there's any story in the Bible that shows us the power of home ownership for stability, it's the story of Ruth and Boaz. Now, Ruth's story starts with loss. Her husband died, leaving her with nothing. No land, no financial security, and no plan for the future. She had every reason to go back to her old life, but instead she made a decision that changed everything. She stayed with Naomi, her mother-in-law, and walked by faith into an unfamiliar place. Can you relate to that? When she walked into this unfamiliar place and when she continued to serve, that's when she met Boaz, a landowner who was wealthy and wise. He saw Ruth's character, her work ethic, and her faithfulness. And when he stepped in, he was basically her knight in shining armor. He provided for her and he gave her stability. When Ruth married Boaz, she stepped into ownership, generational wealth, and a secure future. And what's even more powerful is that their lineage led to King David and Jesus. Now that's how deep the impact of land, home ownership, and legacy runs in Scripture. Now Ruth's story shows us something very powerful. Where you live and what you own can impact generations. When you own property, you're not just thinking about today, you're creating security for tomorrow. Renting is temporary. You can be forced to move, your rent can increase, and you have no control over what happens to the property. But owning provides stability. It allows you to put down roots, build equity, and create something that lasts far beyond you. See, home ownership is generational. Ruth's decision led to a family legacy, and when you invest in a property, you're doing the same thing for your children and your grandchildren. Here's the reality. Home ownership can be life-changing, especially in a market like Hampton Roads that's thriving. For military families, buying instead of renting means you build equity during your time stationed here. For first-time buyers, it means no longer worrying about the landlord's increasing rent or selling the property from under you. For growing families, it means creating a permanent place to call home. You see, the bottom line is this, friends. When you step into home ownership, you're not just buying a house, you're establishing stability. And that's the number 3 biblical truth about home ownership. Ownership provides security, and security creates legacy. Now, here's the thing I want you to remember. Home ownership isn't about stability just for yourself. It's about making wise financial decisions for your family's future. And nobody understood that more than the Proverbs 31 woman. So friends, we've talked about stability and security, but now let's take it a step further, wealth building. Because the truth is, home ownership isn't just about where you live, it's about how you build. And see, nobody in the Bible understood the power of real estate quite like the Proverbs 31 woman. The story of the Proverbs 31 woman is about strategic investing. She was a real estate investor. Look at this verse. It says she considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. That's Proverbs 31:16. Now pay attention to what this means. She didn't buy emotionally. She considered the field first. She did her research. She was not impulsive. She was strategic. She used her resources wisely. She didn't waste money. She invested into something that would multiply. She created something that would produce income. You see, vineyards in biblical times weren't just for personal use. They were a source of wealth and provision. This woman understood something that many people today still struggle with. Owning land is a wealth building strategy. Now, the Proverbs 31 woman didn't just own property, she leveraged it. And in today's world, home ownership remains one of the most powerful tools for financial growth. Homes appreciate in value over time. Real estate tends to grow in worth, creating long-term wealth. Equity can be leveraged. A homeowner can use equity to invest in businesses, rental properties, or financial opportunities. Real estate provides financial security, unlike renting. Homeownership means you're in control of your housing costs and your future. But let's be clear, not all real estate purchases are wise. The Proverbs 31 woman considered her investment first, and today that means buying at the right time, choosing a property that will grow in value, understanding your financial position before purchasing. See, too many people jump into the home ownership unprepared, not thinking about whether the property will benefit them long term. And that's not wisdom, that's impulsivity. So if you want to buy a home that helps build wealth, here are the things that you need to do. You need to think long term. Ask yourself, will this home increase in value? Is this a wise financial move? Don't let emotions control the decision. The Proverbs 31 woman didn't buy because she fell in love with the field. She considered it first. Invest in areas with growth potential. Buying in a neighborhood that's appreciating is better than purchasing in an area where values are declining. The bottom line is this, friends. Home ownership is more than having a place to live. It's a tool for creating generational wealth. And that's the number 2 biblical truth about home ownership. Owning property is a biblical strategy for financial security. Now, this leads us to the final and most powerful biblical truth about home ownership, the promise of land. Because at the end of the day, home ownership is about more than just money. I think we've talked about that a lot today. It's about stepping into the land that God has promised you. Okay, friends, we've talked about counting the cost, stewarding wisely, rebuilding finances, preparing for ownership, creating stability, and investing strategically. But now we're at the final and most powerful biblical truth about home ownership, possessing the land that God has for you. Because at the end of the day, home ownership isn't just about financial wisdom. It's about walking in what God has promised. Now, the Israelites had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, living in temporary places, never settling down, always moving from one place to the next. Can you relate to that? And then finally, God said, it's your time. And I'm here to tell you, friends, it's your time. You see, in Joshua 1, God tells Joshua, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I had promised to Moses. But here's the thing, the land was already promised, but they had to go in and take possession of it. They had to step into the land by faith. They had to overcome obstacles and move past the fear that they had. They had to trust what God said was for them. See, some of you are in the same position right now. You've been renting for years, and quite honestly, you're tired of it. You've been stuck in uncertainty. Maybe you've been afraid to take the next step into home ownership because you don't know if you're ready. But here's the thing. If God is leading you toward home ownership, it's time to stop wandering in the wilderness and step right on into it. Now, there are so many people who are right on the edge of home ownership, but the fear keeps them from moving forward. They have fear of not qualifying, fear of making a mistake, fear of not being able to afford it. But hear me, if God has called you to it, He will equip you for it. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't prepare. I need you to hear that. You need to prepare. You need to count the cost. That doesn't mean that you don't take wisdom and walk in wisdom seriously. But at some point, you have to make a move. Faith without work is dead. And owning a home means that you are planting roots. You are stepping into stability, legacy, and provision. You are breaking cycles of renting without ownership and stepping into something that will outlast you. And for some of you, this is the season where God is calling you to possess the land. So you may be wondering, Sonali, okay, I hear you, I'm motivated, but what does this look like in real life? You see, if home ownership is on your heart, you need to start preparing now. Even if you're months or even a year away, you need to start beginning the process. You need to seek wisdom, working with the right people and getting the right knowledge and making informed decisions. And then, friends, you step out on faith, because there comes a point where you have to take action, because God won't force you into home ownership, but He will lead you there if you follow Him. The bottom line is this, friends, home ownership isn't only about buying a house, it's about stepping into the land that God has for you. And that's the number one biblical truth about home ownership. When God calls you to possess the land, you need to move in faith. Now, if this video resonated with you, if you're feeling like home ownership is your next step, then let's talk about how to get you there. You see, every day I help people step into home ownership God's way. And if you're ready to start preparing, I want to be a resource for you. Because when you move in God's timing, the blessing won't feel like a burden. So friends, what have we learned? Home ownership is not just about buying a house. It's a biblical principle rooted in stewardship, wisdom, and faith. Number one, you have to count the cost before you buy, and that's Luke 14:28. Number two, you must steward what God has given you wisely. That's Matthew 25:14-30. Number three, if your finances are broken, you can rebuild. Guys, I am an example of that, and that's Nehemiah 2:6. Number four, preparation is key. Financial wisdom sets you up for success. That's Genesis 41:33-36. Number five, home ownership creates stability and security. That's Ruth 3:4. Number six, owning property is a strategy for building wealth. That's Proverbs 31:16. And number seven, when God calls you to possess the land, you need to move in faith. And that's Joshua 1. The bottom line is this, friends. If home ownership is in your future, now is the time to start preparing for it. If this message spoke to you, I want to help you take the next step. Click the link in the description to book a consultation with me. Drop a comment below and make sure to subscribe for more faith-based real estate wisdom. Because when you move in God's timing and apply His principles, home ownership won't just be a transaction, it will be a blessing. Friends, thank you so much for watching. I hope you are encouraged and ready to move forward with home ownership God's way. You can do this. I'm Sonali Hudson, and I will see you in the next video. God bless you.